this. So either the uric acid production should be excess in this patient, or there may be decreased excretion of uric acid in the renal tubules. So that is a reason that account for the causation of gout. There are causes like primary causes, there are secondary causes for the increased production of uric acid, and as well as there is a decreased excretion of uric acid. So let us not go into the detail at this junction. So we are going to discuss about gout in the later classes of the slide. Now moving on to so today's topic of presentation is nucleotide metabolism. Good morning to one and all. The basic concepts we should be knowing: what are bases, pyrimidines, sugars, purines, and nucleosides and nucleotides. So what are purines? Purines are nothing but the nitrogenous bases. They are made up of nitrogenous bases, and they contain a ring called pyrimidine ring, which is fused to the imidazole ring. You can look at the 6-membered pyrimidine ring, which is fused with the 5-membered imidazole ring. So you can appreciate the nitrogenous bases 1, 2, 3, 4. And total it is containing 9 atoms. Out of 9 atoms, the 4 are, that is N1, N3, N7, N9, all odd numbers, 1, 3, 7, 9 except 5. They are all contributed by the nitrogen atoms. When you look at the remaining atoms, which are carbon, the second carbon, C4, C5, C6, C8. So these are all carbon atoms that are present in the purine ring. So it's easy to remember pure as gold. A stands for adenine and G stands for guanine. Let us look at the individual structure. When you look at adenine purine ring, it has got an amino group at the 6th carbon atom. Hence it can be said as 6-amino purine. Look at the guanine. What is the difference? At the 6th carbon atom, there is an oxygen molecule here, and there is an amino group at the 2nd atom. That is 2-amino 6-oxyguanine. 2-amino 6-oxyguanine or 2-amino 6-oxypurine. Coming to the pyrimidines. Pyrimidines are again the nitrogenous bases, but how are they different from the purine? Purine, the name is small, but the structure is bigger, because the purine ring is bigger, larger compared to the pyrimidine ring. The pyrimidine name is larger, it's bigger name, but the ring is small. It is containing only 6-membered ring. When you look at the structure, it has got 2 nitrogen atoms at N1 and N3, remaining are carbon atoms. Now how do we remember pyrimidines? Cut the pyramids. That is C for cytosine, U for uracil, and T for thymine. The differences here with respect to individual pyrimidines are: cytosine is present in DNA, thymine is present in DNA, whereas uracil is present in RNA. Look at the structure of cytosine. It has got a oxy group at the 2nd carbon atom, and at the 4th atom there is an amino group, that is 2-oxy-4-amino pyrimidine. And when you look at the uracil, there is at the 2nd atom there is an oxy group, and at the 4th position there is an oxy group, that is 2,4-dioxy pyrimidine. When you look at the structure of thymine, it is close to uracil except for the presence of methyl group, which is located at the 5th carbon atom. Therefore 2,4-dioxy 5-methyl pyrimidine. That means the uracil and thymine, on demethylation of thymine we can get uracil. When you remove the methyl group from the thymine, we get what is called uracil. So this is about the structure of various pyrimidines. Chemistry part we are not going into the details. We are directly jumping onto the metabolism part. Compared to the sugars that are present in the nucleic acids are namely D-ribose, which is present in RNA, and 2-deoxy D-ribose, which is present in DNA. At 2nd carbon atom, you can see that the hydroxyl group is present in the ribose sugar, and in the deoxyribose sugar there is only hydrogen atom, oxygen is removed, and it is 2-deoxy D-ribose. So the ribose sugars are present in RNA and deoxyribose sugars are present in DNA. What are nucleosides? When the nitrogenous bases like purine, pyrimidine combine with the sugars like deoxyribose sugar or ribose sugar, respectively in RNA and DNA, we call it as nucleoside. Simply nucleoside is equal to base plus sugar. That nitrogen base could be purine or pyrimidine, and the sugar would be ribose sugar or deoxyribose sugar. So how do they get attached with each other? The purine atom, this is a purine atom which is attached to the ribose sugar. Since it is a ribose sugar, it is present in this particular component with respect to the RNA. So the ninth nitrogen atom of the purine ring, it is linked to the first carbon atom of the ribose sugar via beta glycosidic linkage. This is the linkage that is present in the nucleosides, that is C1 and N9 via beta glycosidic linkage. With respect to DNA, when we talk about DNA, that is let us take an example of deoxythymidine in case of pyrimidine. This is a pyrimidine ring. We know that the pyrimidines are differentiated with each other with the help of, if we want to say it is a thymine, there should be methyl group. If you want to say it is a uracil, it is almost like thymine, but there is no methyl group. So when you look at the linkage here, the N1 atom of the thymidine, it is linked to the C1 of the deoxyribose sugar. So hence it is deoxythymidine. So this is the linkage that is with respect to pyrimidine, which is present in the DNA. Now coming to the nucleotides. What is the difference between nucleoside and nucleotide? When a phosphate molecule is attached to the nucleoside, we call it as a nucleotide. The nucleoside is base and sugar. Nucleotides are base plus sugar plus phosphate group. Look at the bases that are present in the nucleotides that are present in the RNA, AMP, GMP, CMP, UMP, respectively adenine, ribose and phosphoric acid or phosphate. The nucleotides that are present in the DNA include deoxyadenylic acid, that is adenine combined with the deoxyribose along with the phosphoric acid or phosphate. Similarly, we have deoxyguanilic acid, deoxycytidilic acid and thymidylate. So this is about, in brief, about the various basic concepts of the nucleotide metabolism. Now let's move on to the actual topic, that is your nucleotide metabolism. Again, when we say metabolism deals with both synthesis as well as breakdown, here we are going to deal with the purine and pyrimidine breakdown and synthesis and the disorders that are associated with the metabolism. Coming to the purine biosynthesis, the introduction part. Is there any dietary need for purines? No. Why? Because our body is able to synthesize purines in adequate amount. So we do not require in the diet. They are built as, the purines are built as nucleotides. They are not built singly as adenine, guanine and all. They are built it as AMP, GMP, CMP, etc. Does pathway differs between the species? Various species are synthesizing nucleic acids and nucleotides. Is there any difference among the different species? Absolutely no, because all the enzymes that are synthesizing the purine and pyrimidine nucleotides are same in all kind of species. The very first synthesized purine nucleotide is IMP. IMP. Purine is built on ribose 5-phosphate. What does this sentence mean? That means the prerequisite for purine synthesis is ribose 5-phosphate, which is a phosphorylated form of the sugar. That is ribose 5-phosphate. In the initial slides, we have already discussed about it. Now coming to the purine biosynthesis pathway. In our body, there are two pathways to synthesize purine nucleotides. That is, one is de novo synthesis, the other one is salvage pathway. Why the God has provided two different pathways? Because de novo synthesis operates in most of the cells including liver, but there are some tissues which lack de novo synthesis, like we have brain does not depend on de novo synthesis because the enzymes that are responsible for purine nucleotide synthesis concerned with the de novo synthesis are not located in these tissues, like brain, number 2 RBC, number 3 leukocytes, number 4 bone marrow. These are the 4 important tissues which do lack de novo synthesis. Hence, in these tissues, to overcome the purine requirement, it is the salvage pathway which is going to operate in these tissues. So, let us talk about the de novo synthesis. What do you mean by de novo synthesis? That means the purine ring is synthesized from the different molecules which could be amino acids, amino acid derivatives, certain cofactors, certain coenzymes which are going to participate in the synthesis of the purine ring. Hence we call it as a de novo synthesis. It's a new synthesis that is happening with the help of the various different molecules that are required for the synthesis. We are called as prototropes because we are able to synthesize them. The definition goes like this: the process of synthesis of purine nucleotides from various carbon and nitrogen containing compounds on which are going to build on a molecule called ribose 5-phosphate. I already said you ribose 5-phosphate is a precursor, it's a prerequisite for the nucleotide synthesis. Now moving on to the tissues. Mainly the purine biosynthesis, the de novo synthesis operates in the liver, but it is present in most of the tissues or depending on the de novo synthesis. Coming to the cellular location, the site is cytosol, in which tissues de novo does not operate. I already told you brain, WBC, RBC, bone marrow. In these 4 tissues it doesn't operate. The substrate that is required is ribose 5-phosphate prerequisite along with the PRPP, that is phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate. So I hope till now you are clear, because it is a de novo synthesis. It is going to operate mainly in the liver. Most of the cells can also synthesize them. Number 3, it is going to synthesize in a cytosol, and the 4 tissues which does not depend on de novo are brain, WBC, RBC and bone marrow. The prerequisite is ribose 5-phosphate along with PRPP. Now let's look into the enzymes. Again, I already said you in the last class when we are dealing with prostaglandin metabolism, there also the enzyme was multi-enzyme complex. In fatty acid synthesis, it is multi-enzyme complex. Similarly, in purine biosynthesis also, we do have multi-enzyme complexes of transferases, synthetases, and carboxylases. Because the presence of this multi-enzyme complex, the main important advantage is that it is going to increase the efficiency of the pathway, efficiency in the production of the pathway. That's the reason it is more advantageous. Comparing to the energy that is required for the, like you have a gluconeogenesis pathway, again it is an energy producing pathway. To operate gluconeogenesis, again it requires energy. Similarly here you have a purine biosynthetic pathway. It also, to produce energy, it also requires energy. It is about 6 ATPs are consumed during the biosynthesis pathway of the purine metabolism. Other sources of purine, I already said you in the previous slide that they do require certain amino acids like aspartate, glutamine. They do require carbon dioxide. They do require certain cofactors like magnesium. They do require certain coenzymes like tetrahydrofolate. So these are the various other sources which are highly required in the purine biosynthesis. Now looking into the purine ring. The atoms of the purine ring are contributed by the various molecules. Like I said you that it is a de novo synthesis, and I said you that they are dependent upon other substrate molecules. Like I told you, there are totally 9 atoms. The N1, the nitrogen 1 of the purine ring, it is contributed by the aspartic acid. A for first alphabet, N for first nitrogen atom of the purine ring, it is contributed by the aspartic acid. Please do remember this. This is very, very important, and the structure of this purine ring has to be learned, and the various atoms contributing to the ring is very, very important. Compared to the carbon 2, it is contributed by the formate group of beta carbon of the serine or glycine during the process of metabolism of glycine and serine. You have already familiar with the amino acid metabolism, that is one carbon metabolism, wherein the one carbon transfer takes place between different amino acids and contributing to the one carbon pool. Similarly here the carbon is contributed by the formate group of the serine or glycine through their metabolic pathway. Coming to the nitrogen 3rd and nitrogen 9, they both are contributed by the amido group of glutamine. Again, it's a basic amino acid which is going to contribute, it is rich in its amino groups, it's going to contribute 2 nitrogen atoms to the purine. Sometimes this question can be asked, the major amino acid which is going to contribute to the nitrogenous atoms of your purine ring, the first answer should be glutamine. And C4, C5, N7 of the purine ring is contributed by the glycine, and C8, that is carbon 8, again it is contributed by the formyl group or methynyl group of the beta carbon of serine or glycine during their metabolic pathway. Now the important aspect about carbon 6 is very, very important. The carbon 6 of the purine ring is contributed by the respiratory carbon dioxide. So this is the different molecule which is going to contribute to the carbon 6 of the purine ring. So thus the amino acids which needs to be remembered are aspartic acid and glutamic acid, because these 2 amino acids are going to contribute to the nitrogenous atoms of the purine ring along with glycine, which is going to contribute to the N7. Thus amino acids are contributing to the all nitrogenous atoms. Along with the C2 and C8, they are actually intermediary compounds of the metabolism of serine and glycine, because they are not getting directly contributing, but it is to the formyl group or the formate group which are going to contribute to the C2 and C8, and the C6 is contributed by the respiratory carbon dioxide. I hope you are familiar with it. Thus the atoms of aspartate, glutamine, then glycine, number 3, number 4 respiratory carbon dioxide, number 5 the formyl group or the formate group of serine and glycine has to be remembered. Coming to the reactions, there is something called preparatory step. We call it a step 0. Because I told you that in the initial slide, the precursor for the purine biosynthesis or the substrate that we require are ribose 5-phosphate, because the entire purine ring is built on ribose 5-phosphate. Along with the it produces PRPP in turn, which is acting as a source of ribose 5-phosphate for the further reactions to happen. Now this is called preparatory step. It is not included in the actual purine biosynthesis pathway, because this PRPP has got a multiple roles. It is not only committed or not only specific for purine biosynthesis. This compound can also be utilized for the salvage pathway. This compound is also utilized for pyrimidine metabolism. So it has got a multiple roles. That's the reason it is not included in the actual step, but it is limited as the preparatory step. But this is again a rate limiting, because without the availability of the PRPP, the further reactions are not going to take place. So thus ribose 5-phosphate upon with the help of an enzyme called PRPP synthetase. In most of the books it is written synthase, but make a correction, it is synthetase, which depends upon ATP, which is going to convert to AMP, and it is requiring a cofactor called magnesium in its reaction. Thus it forms what is called 5-phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate. It means there is extra phosphate group, 2 extra phosphate groups that are added to the ribose 5. Initially it was having only 1. Now the 2 other are derived from the ATP and it's going to become 5-phosphoribosyl 1-pyrophosphate. There is a phosphate group at the 5th position. At first position there are another 2 phosphate group. That this is a compound called phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate, called as PRPP. Now there are totally 10 steps till the formation of IMP. From the IMP, AMP and GMP are formed. So the total 10 steps with the 10 enzymes are very, very important as a part of multi-enzyme complex. Now we have with us what is the important molecule that we have, that is PRPP we already have with us. Now let us see how the pathway operates. The 5-phosphoribosyl 1-pyro, you can look at the first position, there are 2 phosphate groups. At the 5th position there is 1 phosphate group, hence the molecule is phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate. The very first reaction that happens, now we have to go on adding glutamine, aspartic acid, glycine, respiratory carbon dioxide, formyl groups, the various steps it's going to be added. So all are going to add to the purine ring, and thus the 9-membered purine ring becomes generated. The very first reaction is catalyzed by phosphoribosyl amidinotransferase. It is a committed step of purine biosynthesis, and it is a rate limiting enzyme of the purine biosynthesis. It is also subjected to something called allosteric regulation or allosteric inhibition. We are going to discuss in the future slide. Now what does it do? Phosphoribosyl amidinotransferase, the name itself is indicating that it is going to transfer the amino group from the glutamine to the PRPP. This enzyme from glutamine, it picks up the amino group and it puts it into the PRPP. Thus you can see here the amino group is added over here. Hence the compound becomes 5-phosphoribosyl amine. The phosphate group gets out from here. You can see here the inorganic pyrophosphate is removed, that is in the form of PPI. The amino group got attached here, hence the compound name is 5-phospho beta D ribosyl amine. Now the second step, now the addition of another amino acid, that is your glycine. Glycine contributes to carbon 4, carbon 5 and nitrogen 7 of the purine ring. Now let us see how it happens. The glycine molecule gets added here. The enzyme name is glycine amido ribonucleotide synthetase. Again, it requires a molecule of ATP. The glycine molecule is added and it is contributing amino group and 2 carbon atoms. Thus, our C4, C5, N7 are ready. Already one N we got it from the glutamine. Already one amino group, that is one nitrogen, we got it here from the glutamine. Second nitrogen we got it from the glycine, and 2 carbons are also we got it from the glycine. That is C4, C5. We are ready with C4, C5. We are ready with N7, and we are ready with the amino group of the glutamine. Now, this compound we call it as glycine amide ribonucleotide at this junction. Now coming to the next step. Coming to the third step, we have a glycine amide ribonucleotide as an end product of the second step. Now what is happening is GAR transformylase. The name itself is indicating it is going to transfer formyl group. From where? It's going to transfer it from the N10 formyl tetrahydrofolate. It's going to contribute its nitrogen atom, its carbon atom from N10 formyl tetrahydrofolate. It's going to contribute to the carbon atom, and thus the compound that is synthesized as formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide. The formyl group is added to this glycinamide ribonucleotide. Thus, we got a compound name formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide. Thus, you can see here one carbon is added, that is C2 and C8. I told you carbon 2, carbon 8 are derived from the formyl group. So, it is added here. This carbon is added. Now, at this junction we have 1, 2, 3 carbons and 2 nitrogens are already filled. That means total 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 atoms are there. Rest are 4 are left. Now, with the help of FGAR amidotransferase. Again, once we say amidotransferase, is going to transfer amino group. Again, I told you glutamic acid, that is glutamine, is going to transfer 2 of its nitrogen. It's going to contribute to the 2 nitrogen atoms of the purine. Already first we have seen in the earlier reaction, and the second nitrogen atom from the glutamine is exactly transferred at this step. It's going to transfer amino group of glutamine to the compound. Thus, it is going to eliminate glutamate, and it is an ATP requiring step. Now we have another amino group here. Thus we got a compound called formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide. Now let us look into the next step. What is the important difference between the step 4 and the step 5? Now here there is something called, here the ring is still open, but here you can see that the ring closure takes place. This is with the help of an enzyme called cyclase. This is a but important step wherein there is a ring closure. Again, it is a ATP requiring reactions, energy requiring reaction for the closure of the ring. This is mainly done by an enzyme called cyclase. Thus, we get a product called amino imidazole ribonucleotide, that is AIR. So, I hope till now there is no doubts from step 1 to step 5. You can look at, again I am going to repeat this. At the step 1, the glutamine is added and there is an amino group into the compound. So, it becomes phosphoribosylamide. Again, in the next step, with the help of GAR synthetase, there is glycine addition over here, and into the product we call it as glycinamide ribonucleotide. Again, it's a ATP requiring step. First step, glutamine is added. In the second step, glycine is added. In the third step, what is happening? Transfer of the amido group is, there is a transfer of the formyl group, that is formyl tetrahydrofolate. It is contributing its formyl group, and the compound name is formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide. That means in the third step there is addition of formyl group. In the fourth step, again there is addition of glutamine, which is going to contribute to the another nitrogen atom of the purine ring, and as well as the amidotransferase. Now in the next fifth step, it's a very important step at this junction, because the ring closure takes place at this junction, and there is a requirement of energy for the ring closure, which is catalyzed by cyclase enzyme, resulting in a compound name called amino imidazole ribonucleotide. At this air formation, there is a cyclization and the ring closure. Now coming to the next step, I said you the important compound that is contributing to the carbon 6 of the purine ring is respiratory carbon dioxide. Now let us see how does this step operate. Amino imidazole ribonucleotide, upon addition of carbon dioxide, from here the addition of carbon dioxide with the help of an enzyme called air carboxylase, it's going to lead to the formation of compound called amino carboxy imidazole ribonucleotide or carboxy amino imidazole ribonucleotide, C-AIR. It is going to help in the formation of C-AIR, that is carboxy amino, because I told you the carboxylase enzyme with the help of carbon dioxide is going to contribute to the respiratory carbon dioxide in the form of C. You can see here COO. This carbon is contributed by the respiratory carbon dioxide. That is, the resulting compound name is carboxy amino imidazole ribonucleotide. Now coming to the next step, there is an addition of aspartate. So the aspartate is, I told you, alphabet A, it is 1, so it is N1 of the purine ring. It contributes to the first nitrogen atom. Thus, with the help of an enzyme called Sycar synthetase, because the product that we get here is succinyl amino imidazole carboxamide ribonucleotide. It seems to be tough, but if you understand, it is a very easy pathway. Just we have to go on adding the different sources of the purine ring, and in the particular order we need to remember. Thus here what is happening, aspartic acid is added here. The compound that is formed is succinyl amino imidazole carboxamide ribonucleotide. You can see the addition of aspartic acid here, and it is contributing to the nitrogen of the purine ring. So the enzyme that is required here is Sycar synthetase. It is with the help of ATP. Again, it is an energy requiring process. Now coming to the next step, that is Sycar lyase. Lyase, again we know that it helps in breaking up the bonds without the utilization of water molecule. Here what is happening, in the succinyl amino imidazole carboxamide ribonucleotide, it is going to remove the fumarate compound, that is fumaric acid is removed from here. Thus the compound that is going to remain, because we do not want all these carboxyl groups here, we just want this amino group. So hence the remaining compound has to be removed in the form of formate or fumaric acid or fumarate. That is, we get a compound called amino imidazole 4-carboxamide ribonucleotide. Thus at this junction again it is called as 5-amino imidazole 4-carboxamide ribonucleotide, that is ICAR. Then at this junction what is happening, after the formation of ICAR, the only atom that is left is again C8. The C2 we have got already added in the earlier reaction. I told you that the carbon 2 and carbon 8 are derived from the formyl groups. Now the ICAR transformylase enzyme is going to give or donates its carbon atom to the molecule. Thus it is going to become N-formyl amino imidazole carboxamide ribonucleotide, that is Ficar. Now after this, the last step of this pathway is that the Ficar, that is formyl amino imidazole 4-carboxamide ribonucleotide, it's going to produce the first purine nucleotide that is going to be synthesized is inosinate or inosine monophosphate with the help of an enzyme called IMP synthase. Here there is no participation of ATP, there is a removal of molecule of water here, and thus the ring closure takes place here. For the closure of the ring, there is a removal of water molecule over here, and it results in the compound formation called as inosine monophosphate or IMP. So these are the 10 important steps of our purine biosynthesis. So I think hope you all understood this. And coming to summarize again, the initial step is catalyzed by PRPP synthetase. Ribose 5-phosphate as a prerequisite gives rise to PRPP. In the first step, again it is contributed by the glutamine, which is going to give rise to amino group of the purine ring. So with the help of the enzyme amidotransferase. In the second step, glycine molecule is added, which is going to give rise to C4C5N7 of the purine ring. The enzyme name is GAR synthetase. Coming to the next, that is step 3, it is transfer of the formyl group from the N10 formyl tetrahydrofolate, and it gives rise to one more carbon atom of the purine ring. In the next step, there is a amidotransferase. With the help of glutamine, the amino group is transferred from the glutamine into this FGAR. It is going to give rise to formyl glycinamide ribonucleotide. After that, the ring closure has to take place at the step number 5, and here for the ring closure it requires ATP molecule with the removal of water. So thus air is formed at this junction, there is a cyclization. Once air is formed, there is the another compound that is importantly synthesized is addition of respiratory carbon dioxide, giving rise to something called carboxyamino imidazole ribonucleotide. This is a imidazole ring. And after this, we have a addition of aspartate with the help of Sycar synthetase, going to synthesize something called Sycar. And after the Sycar synthesis, there should be removal of fumaric acid, because we require only amino group from the aspartic acid. So there is a removal of fumarate with the help of Sycar lyase. And at step number 9, there's again addition of one more carbon molecule from the formyl tetrahydrofolate with the help of transformylase, resulting in Ficar. And the last step of the synthesis of IMP is from Ficar to IMP. It is via IMP synthase with the removal of water molecule. Thus our purine ring is ready in the form of inosine monophosphate. Now let us look into the formation of adenine and guanine nucleotides. The inosinic acid or inosine monophosphate is going to get converted to adenosine monophosphate or adenylic acid. It is not directly converted to adenine, but is always in the form of nucleotides. I told you the nucleotides are synthesized in the purine biosynthetic pathway. So there it requires a molecule of aspartic acid, and the fumaric acid gets released and GTP requiring reaction. Thus there is a formation of AMP. Now coming to the next step. With the same IMP, with the help of IMP dehydrogenase, IMP has got two fates. One is for the formation of AMP, the other for the formation of GMP. Both are purine nucleotides. They are derived from the IMP. That is inosine monophosphate. Inosine monophosphate, upon dehydrogenation with the help of an enzyme called IMP dehydrogenase, it requires NAD as a coenzyme. It is going to form xanthilic monophosphate or xanthilic acid, xanthine monophosphate or xanthilic acid, which is going to give rise to guanosine monophosphate with the help of an enzyme called amidotransferase, wherein it requires glutamine as a cofactor and ATP. So the ATP is converted to AMP, and inorganic pyrophosphate gives guanosine monophosphate. Thus we have both purine nucleotides with us. The conversion of AMP is a direct step from the IMP with the help of addition of aspartic acid, whereas GMP formation takes place to the intermediate formation of xanthilic acid. That's the difference between the formation of GMP and AMP. Coming to the regulation, I already said you that the rate limiting step is catalyzed by glutamine PRPP amidotransferase, which is again subjected to the allosteric regulation. Whenever the purine nucleotides are synthesized in the adequate amount, like IMP, GMP, AMP, they act as a allosteric inhibitors to the enzyme called glutamine PRPP amidotransferase. The regulation happens in three different ways. Number one is allosteric regulation, number two feedback inhibition, and number three regulation depending upon the availability of PRPP. Now coming to the first regulation. The first regulation is allosteric inhibition. The PRPP is converted to 5-phosphoribosylamide, which is the very first step of purine biosynthesis. It is catalyzed by the enzyme called glutamine PRPP amidotransferase. It's going to inhibited by the AMP, GMP and IMP. Look at this, purine nucleotides which have got an inhibitory effect on this enzyme. These purine nucleotides are also generated by the salvage pathway, wherein the DNA synthesis is not operating. Tissues like brain, RBC, WBC, these are going to contribute to the pool of this purine nucleotides apart from the de novo biosynthesis. They are going to inhibit the purine, that is PRPP to 5-phosphoribosylamide by inhibiting PRPP amidotransferase. Number two, feedback inhibition. When you look at the last steps, that is IMP giving rise to GMP and AMP, which are the end products of this IMP pathway. GMP and AMP, they themselves are the end products which are going to feedbackly inhibit these two enzymes. When they are adequately synthesized, when the body has synthesized adequate amount, then when there is no requirement for the further, it's going to inhibit IMP dehydrogenase and adenylosuccinate synthetase. Thus, the IMP is going to it's not going to give rise to GMP and AMP. So thus this is called feedback inhibition. Now coming to the third type of regulation. The third type of regulation depends upon the availability of the PRPP. because PRPP, once it is available, it is diverted to other two pathways apart from this, because salvage pathway requires PRPP, pyrimidine biosynthesis requires PRPP. Thus the availability of PRPP and the balance between the three pathways is very, very important. This is done with the help of purine nucleotide, which is acting as an inhibitors to this particular enzyme, that is glutamine PRPP amidinotransferase. So thus this is the regulation of purine biosynthesis, mainly by the allosteric regulation, number 2 by the feedback inhibition, and number 3 the availability of the PRPP. So this completes the purine biosynthesis and its regulation. Now coming to the, I told you there's another alternate pathway for the synthesis of purine nucleotides, that is salvage pathway. This, what is the importance of the salvage pathway? It mainly operates in, again, brain, RBC, WBC and bone marrow. And the important difference between the salvage pathway and the de novo synthesis is that the salvage pathway requires very less amount of energy compared to the de novo biosynthesis. And one of the important function of the salvage pathway is that it helps the recycling of the degraded nucleotides. We're going to show in the further slides. So the salvage pathway, how does it operate? The main important enzymes that play an important role in the synthesis of purine nucleotides are APRTase and SGPRTase. APRT stands for adenine phosphoribosyl transferase. The adenine combines with the PRPP. I told you PRPP is a prerequisite again for the salvage pathway. Combines with this, it's going to give rise to AMP and inorganic pyrophosphate. The common enzyme for guanine and hypoxanthine is SGPRT, that is hypoxanthine guanine phosphoribosyl transferase enzyme. This is going to catalyze the guanine and phosphoribosyl pyrophosphate, and it's going to give rise to GMP and inorganic pyrophosphate. Then the hypoxanthine combines with PRPP in presence of SGPRTase enzyme is going to give rise to IMP plus inorganic pyrophosphate. One is directly from the purine, synthesis of the purine nucleotide directly from the purines, and the other pathway of the salvage is phosphorylation of the nucleosides. One is from the purine bases itself. The second pathway is from the purine nucleosides. Nucleosides means, I told you, it is base plus sugar. Suppose if it is, if I want to say purine nucleoside, that is adenine nucleoside, that is adenosine. The adenosine going to combine with the ATP to form adenosine monophosphate, that is AMP plus ADP. Again, it is a kinase enzyme which is required here, that is adenosine kinase. So these are the two different pathways of the salvage, that is directly from the purines, the other one is directly from the purine nucleosides. Now coming to the purine degradation. So now I hope you are familiar with the salvage pathway and the de novo synthesis pathway. The important difference is less energy consuming the salvage pathway, more the energy consuming is your de novo synthesis. And I told you already that location wise de novo is mainly in the liver and most of the cells as well, and whereas salvage pathway mainly the 4 tissues which I have already mentioned. And the salvage pathway is directly from the purines and purine nucleosides, whereas the de novo pathway, it requires participation of various compounds like amino acids, amino acid derivatives, respiratory carbon dioxide. It requires participation of the formyl groups, all that. Coming to the catabolism. Now coming to the degradation of the purines. The pathway is very, very simple and it's very, very important in the examination point of view as well. Looking into the AMP, that is adenosine monophosphate, it is getting converted to inosine monophosphate with the removal of amino group. Hence the enzyme is AMP deaminase. Similarly here the adenosine, which is a adenine nucleoside, it's going to undergo deamination with the help of adenosine deaminase. With the removal of ammonia, it gives rise to what is called as inosine. Here the AMP is first converted to IMP. IMP is converted to inosine with the help of phosphomonoesterase. Thus it is going to break this phosphate group and release it as inorganic phosphate. Thus inosine molecule remains intact. This inosine gets converted to hypoxanthine with the help of purine nucleoside pyrophosphorylase. That means there is again removal of ribose 1-phosphate and there is a formation of hypoxanthine. The ribose 1-phosphate molecule is removed at this step. It's a very, very important step, that is purine nucleoside pyrophosphorylase, removing the ribose 1-phosphate, giving rise to hypoxanthine. Now this hypoxanthine is going to get converted to the xanthine. xanthine with the help of an enzyme called xanthine oxidase. Now, what is the peculiarity of this enzyme? When you look at this particular reaction, the water molecule and the oxygen are contributed here, going to give rise to formation of a free radical called hydrogen peroxide. It is an endogenous production of free radical happening in this pathway, and this is going to be taken care by the glutathione reductase system further. And this xanthine is going to get converted to uric acid, which is the end product of the purine degradation. So the end product of purine metabolism, once the question is asked, it is urica. The answer should be the uric acid. Already uric acid estimation we have performed in our practical examination, and we have also done abnormal urine analysis, normal urine analysis. So you are very familiar with the uric acid. Xanthine is converted to uric acid with the help of the same enzyme, that is xanthine oxidase, wherein the water molecule oxygen combined and give rise to endogenous production of hydrogen peroxide. Thus the uric acid is formed. Now let us look into the other purine nucleotides, that is guanosine. And the guanosine undergoes cleavage with the help of an enzyme called guanase. It gives rise to xanthosine. In the formation, I told you how GMP is synthesized from IMP. IMP gives rise to xanthilic acid or xanthosine monophosphate. Further, it gives rise to GMP. Similarly, here it should be the reverse reaction: guanosine to xanthosine, xanthosine to xanthine. So guanase enzyme removes the amino group producing xanthosine, and with the help of purine nucleoside phosphorylase, it removes ribose 1-phosphate and gives rise to xanthine. And similarly, the other mode of mechanism is guanosine is directly converted to guanine with the help of purine nucleoside phosphorylase with the removal of ribose 1-phosphate. With the help of guanase enzyme, it's going to remove the amino group, thus contributing directly to the formation of xanthine. Thus, all these purines, that is adenine and guanine, they give rise to something called uric acid, which is an end product of the purine degradation. This enzyme is very important. It's a key reaction, that is xanthine oxidase, which is going to convert the hypoxanthine into the uric acid. This particular enzyme is inhibited by a drug called allopurinol, which is going to be very much useful. It's a therapeutic drug used in the treatment of gout. It's a drug of choice, in fact. Now coming to the clinical significance of the purine metabolism. So what can happen if there is excessive production of uric acid? Because of the excessive degradation of the purine nucleotides, there is excessive formation of uric acid, resulting in what is called as hyperuricemia. Hyperuricemia means increased production of the uric acid. Similarly, uremia, increased production of blood urea. Here it is hyperuricemia means increased production of uric acid. Do not get confused with the terminologies. Uremia is increased blood uric acid levels, whereas hyperuricemia means increased uric acid levels, and decreased uric acid levels we call it as hypouricemia. Now, what is a normal blood range of the uric acid? In case of males, it is odd numbers 3 to 7 milligram per deciliter, and in case of females, it is 2 to 6 milligram per deciliter. Now, the definition goes like this: hyperuricemia is defined as increased concentration of serum uric acid exceeding 7 milligram per deciliter in males and 6 milligram per deciliter in females. Now, why should it cause any trouble? Because it's an endogenous compound which is produced in the body. Why should increased production of uric acid should account for so many clinical manifestations resulting in gout and all? The peculiar feature of this uric acid is that what are the clinical manifestations in the form of gout that we are observing in the patients is due to deposition of this urate crystals. Why do they get deposited? They have because at 30 degrees centigrade in the low temperature, suppose at the 30 degrees centigrade, what happens to uric acid in the body? It gets less soluble. It becomes insoluble because the solubility of this uric acid reduces almost to about 4.5 milligram per deciliter. When the solubility reduces, it goes on depositing. Especially it has got a affection towards the cooler areas of the body, like the first metatarsophalangeal joint, which is affected, the distal parts and the knee joint. Other joints are also affected, but the most commonly affected joint is first metatarsophalangeal joint. So that is the reason any slight changes in the uric acid levels in the body fluids can cause deposition of the urate crystals, accounting for its pathogenesis. The clinical manifestation or the disease that is related to hyperuricemia is gout. Now, what is this gout? Gout is a hyperuricemic. First of all, gout is a hyperuricemic condition. There is an accumulation of uric acid crystals in the synovial fluid, resulting in the inflammation of the particular joint, leading to arthritis. Arthritis means inflammation of the joints. So I already said it is depositing in the cooler areas of the body. Now there are two types of gout, that is primary and secondary gout. It's very very important to differentiate between the primary and the secondary gout. Now what are the causes of primary? Once we say primary, it is most of the time it is an inherited defect, any defect in the enzyme levels. Now let us look into the enzyme which are defective or abnormal in this kind of patient with the primary gout. So at the first, the very first cause for the primary gout is abnormal PRPP synthetase enzyme. It is actually synthetase, it's not synthetase. Whenever there is an increased activity of PRPP synthetase. What is this enzyme? I told you it is a preparatory step of purine biosynthesis in the de novo. I already said you. If this enzyme is increased, then there is an increased production of purine nucleotides. Increased production, increased breakdown, and resulting in increased accumulation of uric acid, thus resulting in gout. The next important enzyme that has got an abnormal activity is your phosphoribosyl amidotransferase, the very first step of the purine biosynthesis, which is catalyzed by amidotransferase enzyme. If the activity of this enzyme is very high, then definitely it results in more and more production of purine nucleotides, and more purine pool, more degradation, more uric acid pool, and thus resulting in primary gout. The third important enzyme which accounts for the causation of gout is SGPRTase. The deficiency of SGPRTase, suppose if this enzyme is deficient, what can happen? The deficiency of SGPRTase enzyme, we call it as Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, which you are going to study in the further slide. Suppose this enzyme is blocked. What is the function of this enzyme? I showed you in the previous slides. It is going to produce purine nucleotides. What is the effect of this purine nucleotides and the purine de novo synthesis? They are going to allosterically inhibit an enzyme called amidotransferase. Right? Suppose this enzyme is defective, this inhibitory effect on the enzyme is removed. Now there is more and more product. I told you to maintain the balance. There is always the availability of the PRPP is mainly dependent upon its utilization via salvage pathway, pyrimidine biosynthesis, and purine biosynthesis. Suppose the SGPRT enzyme is deficient, the inhibitory effect will not be there on the pathway of the de novo synthesis. When the inhibitory effect is removed, there is more and more production and more degradation, resulting in uric acid pool. Now coming to the causes of the another important enzyme that is accounting for primary gout is deficiency of glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme. The glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme deficiency causes what disease? You are all well versed about glycogen storage disease, the very first one, the von Gersch disease, wherein the patient is going to present with hypoglycemia. I told you 6H that is related to the von Gersch disease. One H is hyperuricemia, because the glucose 6-phosphate normally has to be converted to glucose with the help of an enzyme called glucose 6-phosphatase. Suppose this enzyme is deficient, the glucose 6-phosphate will be channeled into other pathways. It will be channeled mainly into the HMP pathway. What is the function of HMP pathway? Production of more and more ribose sugars and NADPH. This ribose sugars, more and more production, more PRPP synthesis, more purine synthesis, more degradation, again resulting in uric acid pool. So that is the another enzyme which was very importantly deficient in these patients. Coming to the secondary gout. When we discuss about the secondary gout, there is nothing to do with the enzymes over here, but it is something to do with the pathological conditions. Like we get an increased production in case of a patient suffering from malignancies like leukemia, lymphoma, because turnover of the nucleic acids is very high because of metastasis. There is increased cell turnover and more breakdown of the nucleic acids and more purine degradation, all that resulting in excessive uric acid level. And in a patient with large malignant tumor, when they are subjected to any treatments, and there is increased tissue breakdown because of chemotherapy and radiotherapy. So there is increased tissue breakdown resulting in more and more uric acid pool. In a patient suffering from starvation, because the starvation results in energy deficiency of protein, fats, carbohydrates and nucleic acid. So as a source of energy, more and more nucleic acids undergo degradation and producing the uric acid pool. And a patient subjected to trauma will have increased catabolism resulting in the tissue damage, resulting in the increased cell turnover, resulting in increased uric acid production. And in certain diseases, because the tubular reabsorption and the excretion of uric acid has to take place normally And if this process is hampered, there will be decreased excretion. What happens in renal failure? RF stands for renal failure. In a patient presenting with renal failure, the tubular reabsorption and the excretion mechanism is hampered, and thus the uric acid gets retained in the blood and leading upon to the hyperuricemia. And there are a group of drugs called thiazide diuretics which are employed in the treatment of hypertension, edema, congestive cardiac failure. In these kind of patients, what happens? There is an inhibition of tubular secretion of the uric acid, hence the excretion will be hampered, and thus accounting for the increased uric acid levels. There's other condition called lactic acidosis, which we have already discussed in the carbohydrate metabolism. Why do a patient with lactic acidosis also develop hyperuricemia? Because the lactic acid and uric acid, they are all the competitors always for their excretion. Whenever there is an increased lactic acid production, the uric acid competes with it, but the lactic acid escapes into the urine, but the uric acid retains and resulting in hyperuricemia. That's the reason a patient presenting with the gout, such kind of patients has to be asked to for the cessation of the alcohol consumption. Why the alcohol precipitates gout, acute attacks of gout? Because alcohol is going to have a severe effect on hyperuricemia by producing what is called lactic acidosis, because the more and more glucose undergoes anaerobic glycolysis, producing more and more lactic acid. And then there's another mechanism also, that is when you look at the glycolysis pathway, the anaerobic glycolytic pathway, the pyruvate is getting reduced to the lactate, where the NADH ratio is high in the cell, which is going to favor more of lactic acid production. Thus lactic acid concentration is going to increase in a patient with alcoholism, thus accounting for the competition between the lactic acid and uric acid, and the uric acid gets retained and the lactic acid gets excreted in the urine. And coming to the clinical manifestation, the patient can present with the acute gouty arthritis. You can see the swelling and inflammation of the first metatarsophalangeal joint. The patient can come with the acute pain, acute excruciating pain in the joint, the most commonly affected joint, but the other joints could also be affected. In fact, if it is not treated at the right stage or the right point of time, then what can happen? The chronic deposition of these urate crystals can happen in several other joints. You can see the swelling of this joint. This is called topi. This chronic cases can reach to topi. This topi is nothing but its accumulation of monosodium urate crystals. So the urate crystals get accumulated and leading upon to the swelling. How do we diagnose this gout? We have to do synovial fluid aspiration from the affected joint, and when you subject it for polarized light microscopy, you can see the needle shaped crystals. This needle shaped negatively birefringent crystals, these are the diagnostic which are diagnostically peculiar for the hyperuricemia, which is going to reflect the uric acid crystal which are needle shaped. So this is about the diagnostic aspect of the hyperuricemia or gout. And how do we treat these patients? Just for a completion sake, these patients has to be asked to avoid non-vegetarian diet, because non-vegetarian diet is composed mainly of nucleic acids. So it's better to avoid non-vegetarian diet. And second thing, you have to advise the patient to avoid alcohol, because it's going to precipitate the attacks of gouty arthritis. And number 3, there are some group of drugs called uricosuric drugs which are going to promote the excretion of uric acid, like probin acid. This kind of drugs are going to promote the excretion, thus we can decrease the concentration of uric acid. The first golden treatment for the gold standard treatment for this particular gout is allopurinol. So what is the allopurinol? Allopurinol, again we have studied this particular drug for suicide inhibition, competitive inhibition in case of enzyme chapter. This allopurinol drug is going to inhibit an enzyme called xanthine oxidase. How does it do it? Allopurinol gets converted to oxypurinol. It itself gets getting modified to become more powerful inhibitor and kill itself. It's going to kill itself. That's called suicidal inhibition. The allopurinol gets converted to oxopurinol. This oxopurinol going to bind irreversibly to this xanthine oxidase enzyme, and it's going to inhibit it. Thus, the xanthine oxidase is going to be inhibited, and there is no more production of uric acid. The degradation stops at the level of xanthine and hypoxanthine formation itself, but uric acid formation does not take place. But then what is the use? if xanthine and hypoxanthine are still there and they are not only getting converted to uric acid, the last step is only hampered here. But the important advantage is that the xanthine and hypoxanthine, they are more water soluble, they could be excreted easily. Thus, this drug competitively inhibits xanthine oxidase enzyme. Thus, allopurinol is used in the treatment of gout. Of course, it is a gold standard drug. Now coming to the hypouricemia. We have already discussed about hyperuricemia. Now we are going to move into the hypouricemia. Now, the decreased concentration of uric acid levels below 6 in females, below 7, that is below the lower limit of the normal range. I told you 3 to 7 in males and 2 to 6 in case of females. If it is less than that, it accounts for hypouricemia. The two important causes of hypouricemia are adenosine deaminase deficiency and number 2, xanthine oxidase deficiency. This adenosine deaminase enzyme, it is very important enzyme that we are going to read in the pyrimidine biosynthesis and degradation. This ADA enzyme is highly present in the lymphocytes. It is very much responsible for the immunity. It is synthesized by the B cells and T cells of the lymphocytes. The deficiency of this adenosine deaminase accounts for something called severe combined immunodeficiency disease, that is called as SCID. This was the first enzyme therapeutically that was useful as an enzyme replacement therapy, which was very successful for the treatment of SCID, that is adenosine deaminase enzyme. Next is xanthine oxidase deficiency. Whenever there is a deficiency of xanthine oxidase, the hypoxanthine will not be converted to xanthine, xanthine will not be converted to uric acid. Thus, there will be decreased concentration of the uric acid, accounting for hypouricemia. Now coming to the other important clinical significance pertaining to the salvage pathway. I told you purine biosynthesis involves de novo and salvage. Now what is the clinical significance of this salvage pathway? Salvage pathway, the disorders related to salvage pathway are mainly 3. Very important in the entrance examination point of view as well as for your theory purpose, because the Lesch-Nyhan syndrome most commonly asked question again. The 3 important disorders are Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, Kelly-Siegmiller syndrome and APRTS deficiency. Look at the case. A 7-year-old boy with compulsive self-mutilation. What do you mean by self-mutilation? Biting of lips, biting of the fingers. With intellectual disability, he is always limited to bed. He is not able to move his body. And the laboratory investigation shows there is elevated uric acid levels. So what is the diagnosis? What is the enzyme defect? It's a clear-cut picture of, is a 7-year-old boy. It is an X-linked disorder, that is your Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, because the self-mutilation is a characteristic feature of Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. So the diagnosis is Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. The enzyme defective is SGPRTase. Now looking into the Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, what is the biochemical defect? There is a block in this SGPRTase enzyme. The guanine has to be converted to IMP plus PPI with help of this HGPRTase. There is a block in this enzyme. What happens to the fate of this guanine? It's going to produce more of uric acid, resulting in hyperuricemia indirect way. Now, what are the, it is a, first of all, Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, it is an X-linked recessive disorder. It affects mainly males. Number 2, it is due to deficiency of SGPRTase. Because of deficiency of SGPRTase enzyme, what happens? The purines are getting converted into uric acid. They are channeled into the degradation pathway, resulting in hyperuricemia. Now, what are the clinical manifestations? You can see that the boy is restricted to bed because he is unable to move. The patient has biting of his lips, biting of fingers called a self-mutilation. And you can see there is a abnormal neck tilting or lateral movement of the neck because the patient will have dystonia. The muscle tone is reduced in this case of patients, and they are very flexible. Muscles are highly flexible, resulting in any sort of abnormal movement. You can look at the certain abnormal dystonic movements like torticollis, lateral bending and forward bending and backward bending of the neck. So these are the different clinical manifestations of Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Patient presents with self-mutilation, that is biting of lips, biting of the fingers, and the patient is restricted to the bed because of the dystonia, and patient has got the dystonic movements that like torticollis, lateral collis and retrocollis. all that, and patient will have chorioathetosis movement, and there is a defect in the speech as well. The speech becomes very abnormal, and these are the various neurobehavioral manifestations as well as the clinical manifestation that are accounting in the Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. And when you look at, I told you, Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, it is related to salvage pathway. The salvage pathway mainly operates in brain. That is why all neurological symptoms we are getting here, it affects RBC. That's why we get a megaloblastic anemia here, because there is a decreased, there is increased utilization of folic acid. Thus, there is a secondary sort of deficiency of folic acid in these patients. And even if you supplement folic acid in this kind of patients, not going to be treatable, because the main defect is SGPRTS enzyme. So the patient will present with the megaloblastic anemia secondary to the increased utilization of folic acid and resulting in partial deficiency of folic acid, resulting in megaloblastic anemia. So this is about the clinical manifestations of the Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. Now coming to the Kelly-Siegmiller syndrome. In this syndrome, again, there is a deficiency of this particular SGPRT, but not a complete deficiency, unlike we get it in case of Lesch-Nyhan syndrome. There is a partial deficiency of this enzyme. Again, there is a formation of uric acid because the guanines are diverted into purine degradation, resulting in hyperuricemia. The last disorder, again the clinical manifestations are almost similar to Lesch-Nyhan, but the severity is less. Coming to the APRTS deficiency, APRTS enzyme helps in the conversion of adenine and combination with the PRPP into AMP and inorganic pyrophosphate. When this enzyme is blocked, what happens? Adenine gets converted to something called 2,8-dihydroxyadenine. This 2,8-dihydroxyadenine is a very dangerous molecule. Why? Because it is going to be very, very highly insoluble. If it is highly insoluble, it gets precipitated, resulting in the formation of renal stone, renal calculus, and excretion of the sediments in the urine. With this particular conversion takes place with the help of an enzyme called xanthine dehydrogenase. Now the clinical manifestation, you can, especially infants diaper, if you can see that you will find a brownish spots of this 2,8-dihydroxyadenine because of excretion of this particular molecule, which is in a crystal form. It leads to brown spots on the infant's diaper, or even observe the urine for the microscopy, you will find the yellowish brown crystals and resulting in crystalluria. So this is how the microscopy looks, that is yellow brown crystals that are very evident on the urine microscopy. So this is one of the important diagnostic feature of the APRTS deficiency. Now how do we confirm the diagnosis? In case of APRTS deficiency, there is nothing to do with the uric acid, because the reaction is very clear here. The adenine, unlike in Kelly-Siegmiller syndrome, you have a uric acid degradation because of the block in this enzyme. But what happens in APRTS deficiency? Adenine is getting converted to 2,8-dihydroxyadenine. There's nothing to do with the uric acid. That's why the uric acid levels on the blood investigation remains to be normal. Then the patient will have urinary excretion of adenine, 8-hydroxyadenine, 2,8-dihydroxyadenine. They are going to be elevated. All these are broken products of the adenine with the help of an enzyme called xanthine dehydrogenase. So thus we have completed purine biosynthesis, purine degradation, and clinical importance. Out of this, the long question could be the purine biosynthesis, and the salvage pathway, again define the salvage pathway and mention its clinical importance is a very, very important question. Again, you need to, one should be knowing about gout in proper care. A patient presenting with acute gouty arthritis with the elevated serum uric acid levels, what are the line of investigation, what is the line of management, and what is the biochemical pathway involved in the causation of gout. This should be very, very familiar. And what are the primary causes of gout, what are the secondary causes of gout. Again, you should be knowing about Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, what is the defect in Lesch-Nyhan syndrome, what are the clinical manifestations, and how do we overcome this. It's all the golden treatment for any enzyme defect is enzyme replacement therapy only. But apart from that, you can also promote the excretion of uric acid using uricosuric drugs and competitive inhibitors like allopurinol, all these kind of drugs. But the enzyme replacement therapy would be the golden treatment in case of primary gout. So all these things has to be known, and the purine degradation pathways, again with some very, very important question. So these are some of the highlights of the purine biosynthesis and its degradation. So next class will be directly moving into the genetics. Thank you.